Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the show, Indestructible Souls. This is the podcast for mental wellness for Black men and Black boys. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for continuing to join, for continuing to support. Once again, my name is Jonathan Beauregard. I am a licensed psychotherapist, as well as the proprietor and owner of Beauregard Family Therapy Group located in Colton, California. So once again, thank you for joining. Please check us out on the website. If you haven't done so already, you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube, as well as Instagram. So please check us out. Please check out the podcast. Go to YouTube, subscribe, and like. Follow us as I'm putting up new content every week. So this is a weekly podcast, and you can also listen while you drive on Spotify for podcasters. Please go in there and check us out. And so you can catch up on all old shows as well as new content that's going to continue to come out weekly. So as I get set up and get my stick going, like I said, I want to thank you guys for continuing to support. So there's a lot of stuff in the news. I really, I see a lot of that stuff. I don't know if I follow it, but I see it like everybody else. And now everybody's on P. Diddy, house getting raided. There's always some stuff about, relationship stuff, things about wealth, and so forth. But tonight, I'm going to continue along the vein of relationships, but I'm going to talk about something very specific, particularly when it comes to men. So ladies, women, men, young men, but any man that's in a relationship, ladies, gather around because I'm going to give you some insight into why some of your relationships are just, they don't seem to pan out. So can you imagine young lady meets a man meets a woman, and then you guys begin to court, you guys begin to date, and you're looking at this full-size grown man, and you have this mature woman who says she wants a mature relationship, and then things are good at first, right? Things are good at first, probably about the first 3 to 6 months, everything's good. And then we either move in with each other, we start to have real relationship problems. Maybe there's children, so we start to mingle the families. And then things begin to happen and the relationship blossoms. And then you're wondering why this man isn't showing up the way you thought he would, or something else seems to be going on. Why can't this relationship mature and blossom and grow? Now, the reality is that's on both people, but because this is the podcast for men and boys, I always try to focus more on issues that affect men. So here's what happens. And I don't have any numbers on this, but the reality is that a lot of us are in relationships with people who are emotionally stunted. They look like a grown person. In a lot of areas, they act like a grown person, but emotionally, our growth is stunted, and then we wonder why our relationships suffer. They're not the man that we thought they were. They might not be the husband that we thought they would be. They don't quite connect to the kids like we thought they would. And communication, dealing with business, dealing with emotions just don't pan out the way we You know, imagine. So there's something that happens. And so let me explain, or let me give you the topic for today's podcast, which is, we've all heard the TV show, we all heard the group called Arrested Development. Well, Arrested Development is not just a TV show or a hip hop group, it's a real thing. So, to make it simple, Arrested Development is when something happens in someone's childhood at a significant stage of development, it stunts our growth, it stunts us emotionally, that sometimes we stay stuck in a time frame and we fail to develop emotionally, we fail to develop or mature emotionally. The problem is we're now in these relationships with these grown people, but emotionally, we're stuck somewhere in time. And so, this thing called arrested development, the reason why I'm focusing on men is simple, is because now I'm not going to get into all of the stuff that I see on social media these days with relationships. I'm talking real relationships. But the reason why I'm focusing on men is because sometimes women have a demand that men show up emotionally, but sometimes we are not equipped or have the capacity because of this phenomenon we call arrested development. Maturely, yes, we're mature in body. Sometimes our anger matures because the anger is an easy emotion. But the reality of it is, when it comes to a full expression of emotions, we're stuck, we're stunted. And so today, what I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to get in, we could talk about Erickson's stages of development. I don't want to turn this into a psychology class, but there's different stages. So there's infancy and childhood, there's adolescence, there's adulthood, there's early adulthood, and all of those things. So what happens is, if something significant happens in those stages, generally that's where we get stuck. Now think about it. For a lot of black men, when does the trauma start? Childhood, early childhood, adolescence, and so forth. So what happens is we get stuck in a time emotionally, especially if a person's been arrested, been to jail, been to prison, and things like that, or experienced a significant trauma. Our emotions begin to be stunted. So let me start pointing out some behavior so you can start spinning the wheels. Is some of the things you might see. And these are just some general terms. So a lack of emotional intelligence. What does a lack of emotional intelligence mean? Well, in a nutshell, it means I don't know what I feel. I don't experience the full range of emotions, or I don't know how to name them, talk about them, or identify them. And all I know is happy, mad, and sad. Emotional restraint, where the emotional restraint is when I can't, or I try not to feel emotions. I don't want to experience emotion. Oftentimes, the reason why that's the problem is we do destructive things to restrain those emotions. Alcohol, drugs, drink, lash out, whatever it may be. Here's a term that some of you might not be familiar with. So we might see some of these behaviors in relationships is what we call hive-mindedness, the inability to think for yourself, where we're easily influenced by other people's actions. The inability to self-reflect, being in competition with others. And when I say being in competition with others, it means aimlessly. When you're in competition, or you might see a person that's in competition with someone else when that other person don't even know you exist, but you're secretly or aimlessly in competition with other people. Petty or passive aggressive behavior and shallowness. So these are just some snapshots of what you might see in a person that just might have a sense of arrested development. So let me get into a couple of causes of this. Now here's why it's important for not only black men, but this is across the board, right? This is just people in general. You know, a lot of us can experience, men and women can experience arrested development. But the reality of it is, especially if you're raising a young man or boy to be a man, and we're doing things and things are happening, whether they be traumatic, whether parents are neglectful, and so forth, we are stunting our children's emotional growth. What are some of the things that happen? Well, one of the first things is childhood trauma that causes arrested development. So we're talking about childhood trauma. Now, that's a very broad scope. So anything that creates stress or trauma within childhood can contribute to what we call arrested development. Being raised by narcissistic parents, or parents being so narcissistic that they're neglectful because all they focus is on themselves and not meeting the needs of the child. We see a lot of parents, you know, it's about them, it's about their what they got going on, as if they missed out on their childhood, so they neglect their children's childhood trying to relive theirs. You know, they party more than their children do. Another thing that might create arrested development is mental health and physical conditions, health conditions, and being under extreme stress. So generally, this is how one may begin to be stunted or their emotional development is suppressed if they experience some of these things. So I want to shift. So I want to shift specifically to why, particularly men, what are some signs if you're a man or if the man you're in love with or raising or whatever it may be, what are some signs that they may be experiencing arrested development? So we already talked about the childhood trauma, the narcissistic parents or neglectful parents might have a mental health condition. You find kids who have extreme illnesses in childhood, whether it be cancer or some type of physical disability, emotionally get stuck or being under extreme stress. One of the issues, I say this to you ladies, when you're considering taking a mate or you're considering choosing a husband, whatever it may be, one of the first things you probably should do is see what's their relationship like with their mom, with their mother. A lot of men who experience arrested development or their emotions are stunted have mom issues. Not daddy issues. They might have mom issues. Mom might be emotionally immature. They might be highly dependent upon their mom, right? You see a very unhealthy and sometimes unhealthy attachment with mom in the sense that you can't tell if that's mom or boyfriend or mom or girlfriend. So One of the first signs, if your man is experiencing arrested development, is if they got mom issues. When we talk about somebody that can't take instructions, that gets angry, that gets emotionally irritable at direction, or even when given ideas, who can't seem to take criticism and become overly emotional, they might have some mom issues. Here's another thing: men are generally more logical than emotional. If your man operates from a place of emotions, he probably has mom issues and his emotions are stunted. Here's another one, which I find interesting, is your man needs more reassurance than you. What I mean by reassurance, he needs reassurance that you want him, that you admire him. You know, if you go a day or two without complimenting him, he feels insecure. He has to keep an eye on you. Most likely he got some mom issues. Here's the thing. When we talk about somebody who's emotionally stunted, emotionally, and this man has mom issues, oftentimes he's looking for you to be a surrogate mom. They're looking for someone to take her place. So you find yourself in a relationship and wondering why he won't step it up and wondering why he won't take responsibility or take the lead in the relationship, because the reality is he's looking for mom. Interesting, right? So let's go into a couple more signs of if your man is emotionally stunted or experiencing arrested development. So check this out. This type of person takes very little responsibility, and in fact, they avoid responsibility and is quick to blame everyone else for their problems. It's either always the boss, it's the coworkers, it's your fault, it's somebody else's fault. They never squarely take responsibility for their lives or their actions. It's always something outside of me made me do it. And whatever stage of life that they're in, they never take accountability, and it's always someone else's or something else's fault. Also, this type of person avoids responsibility. What I mean by avoid responsibility, here's something you might see. So sometimes people say, are you scared of success? Are you scared of failure? Or whatever it may be. These type of people set themselves up to be as irresponsible as possible. Won't look at their mistakes, will avoid situations that requires responsibility. He doesn't want to be held accountable, and in fact, will have a grown man tantrum if held accountable. Here's the next one. If your man is experiencing what we call arrested development or their emotions are stunted, his life goals, and this is interesting because I ask this question all the time to men in therapy, but their life goals are shallow and short-sighted. What do I mean by that? Well, most of us as men, we're driven by success or a sense of success, and we set goals for ourselves, and most of us want to progress, you know, all the time at some point. But someone who is experiencing arrested development, their life goals, not just short-term goals, their life goals are shallow and short-sighted. And here's what that looks like. And I don't care what profession a person may be or what personal goals they may have, but their goals are so, well, we call them shallow or short-sighted, which means there's no insight to them. The goals are, we call it having that low-hanging fruit. We go after the low-hanging fruit because I don't want to exert myself. I don't want to challenge myself. I don't believe in myself. So therefore, the things that I set for myself are minimal. Here's the reality, ladies or people. Most men hit their financial stride in their 40s. I want to say mid to late 40s, somewhere around there. So a person who goals are short-sighted, if they're still behaving this way by the age of 39, 40, it's going to take something catastrophic to get them out of this pattern. These are the type of people that dream and have these schemes with no plan in place. Their retirement plan is hitting the lotto. They want nice things, but don't have the resiliency or the tenacity to go after them. Here's another thing. When we talk about, is the person I'm with, emotions are stunted and or arrested development. When you're making plans together, their plans are more about me than we. And these are short-term plans and long-term plans. Here's a clear sign of that. And what you see is, and what I see as a therapist, is men like this are only happy if we go with their plan, if you go with their plan, and ultimately they're the only ones that's seen as successful or achieves that goal or fulfills that plan, and they don't necessarily care how you end up when it comes to that. His goal matters more than the collective. Interesting, right? So when he's making plans, whether short-term or long-term, it's more about how I'm affected. I care more about me than I care about the we. Interesting, right? Here's another one. Probably one of the biggest ones, especially for women. Even when you guys are together, you feel lonely. Here's the reason why. Because everything has to be about him. There's not a connection because he is sucking up all of the emotional energy out of the relationship. Another sign is constantly complaining about life. Well, here's the thing. Winners don't complain. Winners don't, we call it belly aching. Whatever happens in life, it's a part of it, we deal with it. But a person whose emotions are stunted always have a complaint. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always, even when things are going right, they find the negative in it because They're constantly have a complaint. Here's another one. Here's another big one. He's not there for you even when he's there for you. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes he don't follow through on promises. He makes things your fault. The other thing is when he's not there for you, even when he's there for you, he's only there for you when it benefits him. Think about that. So what happens is we begin to feel lonely. We begin to feel shut out of these relationships. And even in the times that you're asking for him to show up, he may show up with attitude. He may show up just to sabotage, to so he has something to complain about. And then you realize you're probably better off if he didn't show up at all. Here's another thing. He shuts you out even when he's stressed. So when he's stressed, basically he shuts down and pouts. Interesting, right? So when we talk about someone who's experiencing this arrested development, the reason being is we can say now it's related to trauma, it's related to all of these things that cause this. And we see this a lot, particularly with, yet again, black men, because of, frankly, the plight of things that black men go through. Anywhere from poverty, single parent homes, incarceration, disappointment, emotional neglect, and so forth. Here's a few more signs. He doesn't like compromises. Yet again, he only feels good when he wins. The thing is, he's fearful that if he compromises, for one, he's going to have to do it again, but also fearful of compromising because he only wins when he wins. He only feels good when he wins. And then sometimes it feels like he's going to compromise, but on the back end, here comes resentment, here comes some form of punishment, and then next thing you know, he becomes resistant. Here's a clear one. He makes everything about him. No matter what is going on in his life, he finds a way to make it about him. Some way, somehow, everything circles back to him. Wants to dominate conversations. Anything you're talking about, you could be having a good day. You do something that has nothing to do with him, but he's going to make it about him. The last one, this is where the resentment comes in at, holds grudges. Well, what do you mean? Bears grudges against any and everyone who he feels has come across him. And you get these petty overreactions. You get these, I call them grown man tantrums. Becomes a man baby. And everybody becomes an enemy. Everybody becomes a threat. And then begin to carry this anger begin to carry these things for months and months and months. So why is this important, particularly for relationships and to understand this about men in general, but particularly black men? Is that oftentimes we get in relationships with an expectation that because you're over the age of 18, because you're grown, because you're a 30, 40-year-old person, a 30, 40-year-old man, that we are emotionally equipped to be in mature relationships. And I'm not saying that we're not. What I'm saying is oftentimes we get in relationships with people whose emotions have stopped growing. We stopped experiencing the full range of emotions. We latch on to anger. We understand sadness. We understand stress. But the other full range of emotions and how to deal with life, somewhere along the way, those things were stunted. Those things stopped growing. And then we ask ourselves, why do we struggle in relationships? Why do we struggle with parenthood? Why do we struggle on the job? Why do we struggle to navigate life in general? Is because mentally and emotionally, because of whatever circumstance, mentally and emotionally, we stop growing even though our bodies continue to grow. The stakes are higher, right? How many people lose jobs because they can't navigate the stress or what's going on the job emotionally? How many fathers struggle as a father because they can't navigate what's going on with parenthood emotionally? And the biggest of them all, why do we struggle in relationships? Because as those requirements are mount up, meaning I have to be a solid husband or boyfriend, I have to be a solid provider and protector, I have to be the one to protect the family, I have to be the one to lead the family, I have to be the one who makes sure that the family is okay even when things are in chaos, then this is why sometimes we can't handle that. Here's the thing. Next week, I'm going to talk about what we call the Peter Pan effect or failure to launch, which is directly connected. Oftentimes, we wonder why men escape certain situations, parenthood, leave relationships, and seemingly go find less challenging situations. This is why. Because emotionally, we are stunted. Emotionally, we stop growing and developing at some point because of all of these things. Now, there's a way out of it. First off is there's recognition. Next week, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the ways. I'm going to do a whole show on how a person can rediscover themselves. So we'll get to that. How do I rediscover myself after realizing that I've been living in a pool of trauma my entire life? That I haven't been growing and developing emotionally and mentally for half of my life. And here's the thing. And this, I was raised by a single mom, but I think my mama was crazy. But I also know and had to learn what were the pitfalls of being raised by a single mom. There were some things emotionally that I had to develop in adulthood that through my own process, I understood it was because I was raised by a loving single mom. The intentions were there. However, when we talk about having those mom issues, and I don't mean in the sense, always in the sense that me and her have conflict, but every situation was responded to from a woman. women are going to cater to those extreme emotions and pamper boys. You know, there's a saying that goes that women raise women but love their sons. Women raise girls but love their sons. So unless you have a single mom that's raising a boy and not just going to love whatever he shows up with and placate to the emotions instead of helping him develop emotionally, then this is what we get. The problem is, as we get older, we get into relationships, we get married or long-term relationships, we have kids. However, we left our emotional development behind either in childhood or adolescence. The problem is there's a lot of fathers out there struggling, and we give fathers who aren't engaged with their children a bad rap. Well, this isn't to make an excuse, but this is to help understand. Prisons are full of men whose emotions have been stunted. Probably at the heart of why they're in prison. So when we think about emotional development for our men, we have to take it serious. We want to say, you know, men aren't emotional. Well, we are. We're human beings too. And so when you meet somebody who is sound emotionally, understand that they probably went through a process or their foundation was more conducive to being emotionally fit. So one of the things, I'll give you a couple of things that needs to happen. We're going to always say you might want to see a therapist when it comes to, are you stunted emotionally? You also want to take other steps to connect to your emotions, meaning understanding yourself, developing some emotional literacy, and there's ways to do that. I'll get into that in the next show or the show after that. I've got to look at my schedule. Setting boundaries. And here's one of them. Men, you have to start being honest with yourself. I'm grateful to say that I have quite a few Black men that come to therapy. And the ones who have decided to come to therapy and that take it serious, one of the things that they have to do is break image, break the false sense of security, break the false sense of confidence so they can learn who they truly are. And once you can do that, you can be honest with yourself, understand the weaknesses, understand your strengths, understand your shortcomings, understand where you're at emotionally, and then begin to build upon it. So when we talk about people who are experiencing arrested development or their emotions are stunted, we have to understand that it takes patience and time to gain that, especially the older that you are. So yet again, my name is Jonathan Beauregard. This has been Indestructible Souls. Once again, please go to YouTube, subscribe, like, go to Facebook, follow, check out the content, go to Instagram, check us out. You can find Beauregard Family Therapy Group at www.beauregardtherapy.com and follow us, and we can help you with your emotional and mental needs. Yet again, this is Indestructible Souls, and we're out.
Yeah.